Okay, so today we're going to continue with getting into tefillah, and we're back on track. Last time we dealt with that, it was like a while ago, for Pesach. We actually covered Kabbalat Shabbat, just kind of like reminding you what we have in Kabbalat Shabbat. We have 6 Psalms representing the 6 days of the week, and then we have the Lecha Dodi poem. We mentioned that this entire service and practice originated in Tzfat by the Kabbalists, and we also described that there were several stages in which this service, so to say, was developed. First was Psalm 92 and 93, and then it was Psalm 29, and then also the other Psalms 95 through, I think it's 95. We start with 95. Yeah, 95, 96, 97, 98, and 99. And of course, the poem. And maybe just to kind of to finish it. So we have, after Lecha Dodi, we have Psalm 92 and 93. Now, as I mentioned before, this is the original or the most ancient part of the Kabbalat Shabbat. So if you look on page 320 today, we have the Art Scroll Siddur in front of us. But Psalms 92 and 93, we understand it jumps right immediately. Why? Because it starts Mizmor Shir LeYom HaShabbat, right? A song for the Sabbath day. And what's interesting and the practical ramification of that is what we call Kabbalat Shabbat, the acceptance of Shabbat. So if you remember, when we talked about last time, we talked about lighting the candles of Shabbat. And we said that that's mainly is done by women. And that act of lighting the candles is what symbolizes the acceptance of Shabbat. That means up until that point, we can do all sorts of melachot, we can do all sorts of acts that are obviously permissible during the week. However, in Shabbat, they're prohibited. And that act of lighting the candles is kind of the distinction between the two times. Okay? I can do melacha, I can do, and actually the last act that one does is lighting the candles, because creating fire is something that we cannot do on Shabbat. Okay, but that's the women by lighting candles. What happens to the men when they're in shul? So, as I said before, whether you accept Shabbat, whether you do something or don't do something, Shabbat comes. You know, once it's the time, it's the time, right? Once the sun sets, it sets. That's it. However, there's an act, and for the men in the shul, or actually, even if they're davening at home, it's that recitation of Psalm 92 that actually makes it that from that moment on, it is Shabbat. Why this is important, why this is practical. So for example, we're heading towards the summer, right? And in the summer, Shabbat comes late. Okay, many places, including Beth Jacob, we have Friday night services earlier. Okay, so that is called part of Tosefet Shabbat. Let's talk about Tosefet Shabbat for a second. What is this concept? Tosefet Shabbat, I mean addition. We have like a little addition to Shabbat. So every Shabbat, when you light the candles or when you look at the calendar and there's a time for when Shabbat comes, that time, I know I'm not supposed to tell you that, but that time is a little bit early. It is earlier than the real time of Shabbat. This is why many of you know that you have another 18 minutes and whatever, the different customs about that and all that kind of stuff. What is this idea behind that? It's called Tosefet Shabbat. We're adding time to Shabbat. We're taking away from Friday a little bit and making Shabbat a little bit bigger, longer, right? Same goes also at the end of Shabbat, right? So technically Shabbat probably kind of ends a little bit before the official time that you see in the calendar. However, we wait kind of a later time. And all that stuff that we do is kind of a buffer zones to make sure that people are not going to violate Shabbat. So we, it's like when we need to go out, I tell my wife always like it's, we need to leave like a half an hour before the actual time. I just know, it's just, we'll never leave on time. So I always give her, kind of half an hour earlier.
You should not make that kind of encouragement.
She knows. She knows. I said my house. I said my house. I said my house.
So it's a nice way that you are stopping the plane.
Beautiful. Oh, you can always count on Hannah to find a positive. But the idea is that we add from Shabbat, right? Okay. So generally speaking, that's not a problem, but I'm taking from weekday and I'm elevating part of that day into Shabbat. I'm giving that sanctity. Now, what happens in the summer? So I'm going to, okay, Shabbat starts at about 7:30 now, right? Officially. Days are longer in the summer. Shabbat starts about 7:30. 7:30, that means by the time I'm going to come back from shul, it's going to be close to 9 o'clock. Especially if you have little kids, starting dinner at 9 o'clock, it's not the greatest idea, right? So many, many years ago already, the practice has started, mainly in Chutz La'aretz and diaspora. In Israel, it's less popular. Even though it's starting to catch up. Shabbat is never that late in Israel, but anyway, that you start earlier. So what's the big deal? We do Tosefet Shabbat every week. Gonna make it a bigger Tosefet, a bigger addition to Shabbat. So we're gonna start earlier. So the question is, how early can you start? Okay, different opinions here. Basically, we say Plag HaMincha. Plag HaMincha. What's Plag HaMincha? So as you know, we have just something. Do we need to go into all the explanation of Shod Zmaniyot? I'm trying to stay away from that. It's technical and boring, but we have times in the day, and those times are determined based on the time that we had to bring the korbanot in Beit HaMikdash. Those times are assigned for the tefillot. So, for example, if you look at, if you have an app or you have a Jewish calendar or whatever, and you see, the time for Shacharit, the morning service is from this to this, and then you have from Mincha from this time to this time, and okay? Generally speaking, it has to do with dawn and etc., like what time the sun rises up, and so there's a calculation how you do that. I don't want to go into all those technicalities. Okay, so there's a time for the mincha service, right? The afternoon service. Fine. It's kind of supposed to be like from midday until certain part that is considered to be like already getting close to what we call the evening. Okay. Fine, that's the time for mincha. So Plag HaMincha is when I take all that time, and it's the middle of it. Okay, and I'm saying that for various halachic purposes, from that middle point on, I can consider that, I can attach that to the next day, i.e., to the evening. Right? Remember, in Judaism, the day, what we call the Yemamah, the 24 period, is from the evening, from the night. This is where the, right, Shabbat starts Friday night. Okay. So what I can do is from the midpoint of the mincha, plaga mincha, I can attach that part to the evening and take that and say, okay, this is going to be my Shabbat. So let's assume that that point is, I'm just going to make this up, 5:30 p.m. Even though Shabbat in the calendar, you'll see it's 7:30 p.m. That means all that part from 5:30 p.m., those 2 hours, I can attach them to the evening, consider them to be Shabbat. Now, based on this idea, many synagogues have the practice of starting Friday night earlier. So you start earlier, you finish earlier, hopefully, and then you can have dinner at a normal time. Make sense? Okay. Not everybody does that. It's fine. It's kind of like interesting because you daven Mariv and you say it's night and everything, and then you walk out and the sun is still, you need the sunglasses. So this is kind of like funny, but from halachic perspective, it's considered to be already for you Shabbat. It's the night. The fact that the sun is still there is completely irrelevant. Okay, so there are like technicalities, like for example, now with Sfirat HaOmer or the Shema, there's certain parts that you need to repeat when it's actual dark. Okay, but if there's a problem, there's always a solution, right? Fine. Back to our thing. Shabbat is going to be 7:30 p.m. It's now 5:30 p.m. I'm in the synagogue. What is it that triggers for me that I can consider those 2 hours already as Shabbat? Psalm 92. For women at home is by lighting the candles. They can do that also from Plaga Mincha. And for men, during Tefillah is the recitation of Psalm 92, which is, as we mentioned last time, the earliest part of Kabbalat Shabbat. Okay? By accepting Shabbat, I recited Psalm 92, I accept Shabbat. Now that allows me to daven Mariv. Because Mariv I can daven only when it's night. The sun is still up there in the sky for 2 more hours. I accepted it as Shabbat. And because I accepted it as Shabbat, it means it's for me, it's already Shabbat. And that gives me the permission to go into Mariv.
So when we chant Psalm 29.
Not 29, 92.
Yeah, but in the book.
No. Go after L'Chadodi. You come to 92.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay? So that is where it becomes Shabbat for you. Yes. Same idea. Again, so even if Shkia, even if sundown is like 11 p.m., let's say, again, it's going to be in the same ratio that you have the mincha time. You have Plaga Mincha, so maybe Plaga Mincha is going to be 9 p.m., not 11, whatever. And then it's the same idea. It's all like being pushed though.
We family in Nancy very often go there. Shabbos really is not, it's about 11 o'clock. And early Shabbos is, and I can take that, I've been there in June.
Yeah.
Early Shabbos is 8 o'clock.
Here we go. Yeah. Yep. I mean, there's limitations to what you can do, right? You can't start Friday morning and say, okay, it's going to be Shabbat. So I said, the point from which we can calculate and say, okay, that part is going to be attached to Shabbat is Plaga Mincha, meaning which is the half of the Mincha time that you have on Friday. Okay, so this is Psalm 92. We talked about Psalm 92 last week, which takes us into the Kaddish. If you look at page 322, we're in the Archipel Siddur today. We have a mourner's Kaddish. Interestingly, if you look a non-traditional Siddurim, like for example, Reform Siddur, you're not going to see the Kaddish, the mourner's Kaddish over there. I'm not even talking about like, you know, what happens in terms of the other sections of the Tefillah. But this is very, very interesting point. Why do we have mourner's Kaddish here?
What's said?
Yeah.
It's like between services.
Okay, good, excellent. So Kaddish, first of all, we know that there are several types of Kaddish, right? We have the half Kaddish, we have the full Kaddish, we have the mourner's Kaddish, we have Kaddish al Israel, the Rabbi's Kaddish, whatever. The main function of the Kaddish is to separate different units of Tefillah. Mainly the half Kaddish is going to do that. Sometimes it's other types of Kaddishim that do that. Now, interestingly, there's a practice that goes back hundreds of years, probably to Kabbalistic times, that the recitation of Tehillim, a public recitation of Tehillim, triggers the mourner's Kaddish.
Why? Who said this first?
I don't know who said that first, but you need to have a Kaddish here anyway to separate, because here, let me explain. So we have that separation. What happens after the Kaddish? Look at the bottom of the page. What happens there? We go into a section that's called Bamei Madlikin. In different nuschaot, we have other things, like in Nusach Sfarat, for example, is going to be Kegav Nadiinim, which is apart from the Zohar. Other congregations are not going to have any of that stuff, and they're going to have a little drash, a little mini sermon, or whatever. So there's a section of Torah study. We're going to talk about it in a second. Okay? So I have Kabbalat Shabbat. I need to separate it from the Torah study. And then the Torah study is going to be separated from the Mariv that I'm going to go into. Okay? This is how, so I need to separate the three units here. How do I do that? I'm going to do it with a Kaddish. So specifically, it is a mourner's Kaddish, because the mourner's Kaddish is associated with the public recitation of Tehillim. I think it's kind of a Kabbalistic idea, David, to your question. There's this notion of public recitation of Tehillim that creates that effect that the Kaddish is talking about. That may God's name be exalted and sanctified, right? We just did that. The recitation of Tehillim triggers that. And so since this is not part of the service, it's completely separated. And so we give it to the mourners to recite it. Okay. So we have a separation, we have the mourner's Kaddish, then we go into Torah study. Now, here is an interesting variation on the theme. First of all, why do we need Torah study here? It's not time for Mariv, that's exactly it. It's not time for Mariv yet. Kabbalat Shabbat is always before the time of Shabbat. Right? That's the whole point. You accept Shabbat in the process. So if Shabbat starts at 7:30, like you look at the calendar and it says 7:30, you actually have until the real time of Shabbat, until about 7:45, 7:50, something in that area. Okay? Now, the service starts at 7:25. How long does it take to do Kabbalat Shabbat? Okay, the Chazan is not going to schlep it too much. Okay? It takes a couple of minutes. What do you do with that time now? Now, not only that, what's the earliest time for Mariv? Has to be the nightfall. Okay, and there's what we call the Ben Hashmashot, that limbo time between sundown and what we call nightfall, which is like when we have the stars out. Okay, so there's a significant amount of time that we need to kill, basically.
So in the winter, we don't have the.
No, we have the same thing. Yeah,
Just that it starts early.
right. So what do we do? So what do you think Jews can do, like especially in the early days? What are they going to do? They're going to learn. What are you going to learn? Things associated with Shabbat. And specifically, this is the Mishnah. This is the Mishnah of Shabbat, the second chapter. It talks about what kind of wicks, what kind of material, oils, and that kind of stuff is permissible, what the conditions, all that kind of stuff. If you're going into Shabbat, you need to know the halachot of Shabbat, the laws of Shabbat. So this is the Torah study that is traditionally was, and many congregations still do that. Now, the Sephardic tradition and a Kabbalistic tradition is to do something else. There's a paragraph from the Zohar in Parashat Vayakhel called Kegavna, and don't ask me exactly what it's all about. I'm not, but it has a part of it that talks about the nature of Shabbat from a Kabbalistic point of view. And so it's a Torah study, a different aspect of Shabbat, less technical, more spiritual, that is an Aramaic and is found in the Sephardic tradition. Many modern places say, okay, if what we need here is a forum of Torah study, basically a time filler so we can daven Mariv, let the rabbi speak. Something that, okay. So every congregation has a different take on that, but the function is the same function. It's a time filler until we can daven Mariv. By the way, now think about it. If it's a time filler till we can daven Mariv because we need to be night to daven Mariv, what is the implication? By the way, that's what a lot of congregations do in the summer. They cut it all together because it's not going to be night anyway. We are declaring it's going to be for us night anyway. So there's no point of doing that. Correct. That's going to be for the early minyanim. Some of them cut it in the summer because we say we do everything anyway earlier. We're not going to wait for the Mariv anyway to be nightfall, and we're going to do whatever is necessary later on to fulfill the halachic requirements. We're going to talk about that. So they cut it all together, and they go directly into Mariv in those services. Some places. Okay, but you understand the logic. Which takes us to, after all that Torah study, into what? If you look at 328, I'm sorry, 328, you see it's the Rabbi's Kaddish. Why? Because again, we said we need some sort of a Kaddish to separate that Torah study from what we're about to recite, which is the Mariv service. And what happens after a Torah study? It's the Rabbi's Kaddish. Because it has that line, Al Israel, Ba'al Rabbanan, Ba'al Talmidei Hon, Ba'al Kol Talmidei Hon. On Israel and the rabbis and the students and the students' students and all those who learn Torah. Okay, so the Rabbi's Kaddish is associated with Torah study. And this is, by the way, how it's originated. It's originated after the Torah study. Was a Torah study, and we're going to see that later on. There are parts in our service that are built in Torah study. So Torah study is a mitzvah. It's an obligation, right? Now, a lot of people don't have the time during the week, during the day, to take a break and learn Torah, right? So the rabbis decided, you know what? We're going to make it easier for you. You're going to come for davening anyway. We're going to put some Torah study inside the davening. You're going to check the box for that. A couple of examples. Well, this is one example, right? It's Torah study. Another example is in Birkot HaShachar. Oh, yes, Rabbi Ishmael Omer. It's all right. You have at the end, right? We have a Torah study, but that's for different reasons.
A different one, but always at the very beginning, it was very English. You say and then there you recognize.
Right, and that's the reason. So because we say Birkot HaTorah, we say the blessings of Torah study, you have to go into Torah study. So it's a little bit different over there. Okay, towards the end of Shacharit every day, we have a section after the second Ashrei. It's called Kedusha de Sidra, Uva Letzion Goel, and all that kind of stuff. That is a remnant of an ancient tradition of Torah study that was like done at the end of the service. So at the end of the service, there was Torah study. A remnant for that, we have many congregations have that even today. That's like somebody, the rabbi usually gives a short 1 minute something after the service. Okay, so the practice was to have a Torah study, and when it was a public Torah study, that followed mainly, by the way, the sermons, right? The sermons on Shabbat and holidays, that followed by a Kaddish, what we call the Kaddish de Rabbanan, the Rabbi's Kaddish, which is associated with the Torah study. Okay? Now, yes.
I know there is the regular Kaddish, that somebody is saying Kaddish after losing something.
That's a mourner's Kaddish. Okay.
Why do they call this Kaddish? This is what the problem is.
What do you mean?
It's not the same thing.
It is the same thing.
If it's the same thing.
Different variation. Okay, fine. Okay, so we have, look, we digress, but this is good. We have 5 types of Kaddishim in our liturgy. 5. One is called the half Kaddish. Okay. Then we have the mourner's Kaddish. Then we have the full Kaddish. Then we have the Rabbi's Kaddish. Then we have what we call the great Kaddish, the Kaddish HaGadol. Okay. So let's go over that for a second. The half Kaddish is kind of like the basic, shortest form of the Kaddish. Main function is to separate the different units of tefillah. Okay? I didn't check that anywhere, but it is my theory that even the word Kaddish basically tells us that, because the word Kaddish comes from the Shoresh Kadosh, holy. Holy means separated, and therefore it separates the different sections of tefillah. That's the earliest form of Kaddish that we have, the half Kaddish. Next is the mourner's Kaddish. The mourner's Kaddish add 2 lines to the half Kaddish. It has the half Kaddish and then adds 2 lines. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shmaya and Oseh Shalom Im Romav. Okay? Fine. On top of that, we have the full Kaddish. The full Kaddish takes the mourner's Kaddish, add another line, Titkabel tzlaoton uvaot hon. May the prayer and supplications of your people Israel be accepted before you. That's the full Kaddish. The full Kaddish is usually connected to the Amidah in some form. So sometimes they are separated, but as long as you don't hear the full Kaddish, you know that you are, let's call it, in the Amidah zone. That means there's like stuff in between, but there's still from, in terms of the structure of the tefillah, it means that we are still connected to the Amidah. Because titkabel tzlaoton uvaoton, when we say that, may the supplications and the prayer of your people Israel be accepted. What are those supplications and prayers? It's the Amidah. So it's connected to the Amidah. Okay, usually think about the repetition of the Amidah, and immediately there's a full Kaddish after that, usually. Okay, so that's the full Kaddish. Then we have the Rabbi's Kaddish. The Rabbi's Kaddish, as I mentioned before, is associated with Torah learning. It has that specific line, Al Yisrael al Rabbanan, and that line replaces the line of Titkabel tzlaoton uvaoton that we have in the full Kaddish. Which brings us to the fifth type of Kaddish, which is the great Kaddish, or Kaddish Hagadol, the big Kaddish. We recite that Kaddish on two occasions. At the time of burial and a funeral, and upon a completion of a tractate from the Talmud. These are the only two times.
Which is
Very
really worrisome.
very different, correct. One is a joyous occasion, and one is, okay, so there are like a lot of reasons. If I try to summarize them, somehow like make a big salad of all those reasons together, the following emerges that just like at the time of the burial, right? It's a declaration of that we believe in Tchiyat HaMetim also, right? Tchiyat HaMetim, resurrection. And so there's a matter of some sort of a declaration that nothing is final, completely final. Even death is final, but there's the idea of resurrection. And resurrection is connected to coming back.
This is why they say Hashem natan, Hashem lakach.
Correct.
Those two things, it's like
Okay, maybe. But that is connected to completing a tractate of the Talmud in which we say Hadran alach. It means we're going to come back to you. I'm going to come back to you. And it's all connected to this idea of the cycle of life, and you know, there's return and all that kind of stuff. Okay? That's the best I can do. You know, it's interesting. In Judaism, many times we don't really, it's not about the way we feel. Our emotions are not what, I mean, we should express our emotions, but through the text. It's not that the text represents necessarily our emotions. It's theological ideas. The texts usually represent theological ideas. And you, or me, as a Chazan, for example, my job is to interpret our emotions into those texts.
This is the expressions people have that it's written.
Yes, but as you can see, there are like many interpretations for each text, but the text itself expresses theological ideas and not emotional ones. Not necessarily. Okay, So we have this Kaddish, which takes us into Mariv. And okay, so let's talk about Mariv for a second. Okay. Every Mariv, okay, whether it's Shabbat, holidays, weekdays, doesn't matter, have two main units. Each unit is going to be broken into subunits. One unit is the Shema, and one unit is the Amidah. Okay? So far, so good? Okay. Why do we daven Mariv? At all. Okay, so that goes back to the debate in the Talmud about the source of tefillot. What's the source of tefillot, right? And I mentioned that in the first class, that there are two opinions. One claims that it's based on the tradition or what our patriarchs did, and there's text proof. The Talmud brings text proof that Abraham was the one that established the morning service, Yitzchak is the mincha service, and Yaakov is the evening service. And the evening service, where is that? What's the story? What's the incident? It's when Yaakov runs away from Esav after stealing the bracha, and he it's night, he goes to sleep. It's the whole famous story of the ladder with the angels going up and down, right? The place is called Beit El, and the pasuk in the Torah says, "Vayifga b'makom vayalan sham." Vayifga b'makom, and the Talmud goes and says, "Ein pgia ela leshon tefillah." That means that word means that he davened. No, that takes 20 years later. Yeah, that 20 years later. That's in Ma'avar Yabok later on, 20 years later. So he's davening and he goes to sleep, right? Okay. So that's one theory. The other idea that the Talmud also brings, it says, no, our tefillot they represent the korbanot, the sacrifices that were brought in the temple. So just like we have a tamid shel shachar and tamid shel ben arbaim, meaning the everyday sacrifice that was brought in the morning and one in the afternoon, that's shacharit and mincha. What happens in the evening? Right, it's the leftovers, the fatty parts, the chelev, and all those parts that need longer time. You got to understand, in Beit HaMikdash, they had not only those two korbanot, but they had plenty of other korbanot, like people who committed all sorts of sins brought korbanot during the day. People who had all sorts of Thanksgiving offering, they brought it. Whatever. There's like a lot of stuff. It was a busy place. And so there are certain leftovers that continue to burn throughout the night. Representing that is the Mariv service. Now you're going to ask me, who cares? What's the difference? Well, difference, it's the level of obligation that each tefillah has. So, if the shacharit is parallel to the morning, the tamid shel shachar, and mincha is parallel to the tamid shel ben ha'arbaim, that's a Torah commandment, and that's it. However, the Torah doesn't talk about a third korban. This is the leftovers. What if there's no leftovers that night? What if people didn't bring a lot of korbanot? Kohanim were super efficient that day. Fire was very strong. I don't know. They didn't have leftovers to be burned throughout the night. Theoretically, that could happen. So what? And indeed, Indeed, the conclusion was that Ma'ariv, the Arvit service, started as a reshut, not obligatory. However, later on, the Jewish people accepted it as they accepted it. Thank you. And therefore, it became also obligatory. So for us, it's already obligatory. However, it's not the same level of obligation as the morning and the afternoon. How that translates? Well, it translates to several things even today. I'll give you a couple of examples. We said that Shacharit and Mincha, the Amidah has a repetition, right? After the silent Amidah, the Chazan repeats the Amidah. Why did we establish that? Because not everybody knew how to daven. A lot of them were illiterate. They didn't know what. So the rabbis decided to establish, so the Chazan is going to repeat the Amidah because that's obligatory. And by people listening and say Amen at the end of the bracha, they fulfilled their obligation of the tefillah. Okay? Fine. Because Tfilat Arvit, because Ma'ariv in the beginning was Reshut, was not obligatory, not on the same level of obligation, we do not have, even today, repetition for the Amidah in Ma'ariv. Okay, that's one example. Another example. Tomorrow and Thursday is going to be Rosh Chodesh. Right? On Rosh Chodesh, we have additions, right? We have Ya'aleh v'Yavo. Say Ya'aleh v'Yavo both in the Amidah and in Birkat Hamazon. What happens if I forgot to say Ya'aleh v'Yavo in the morning? I have to repeat. What if I forgot to say Ya'aleh v'Yavo in the evening? I don't repeat. Okay? So that ancient machloket and those ancient ideas still translate into our practicality today. Okay, so this is the Ma'ariv service in a nutshell. Now, we have the Shema and we have the Amidah. Why do we have Amidah? Well, Amidah is the heart of every service. Shacharit, Mincha, Arvit, there's always Amidah. Why the Shema? I have the Shema both in the morning and in the evening because the Pasuk says that's not a Pasuk. But the words are different. Right? The Torah said, when you get up and when you lie down. And from that, the rabbis learned that what? The obligation to recite the Shema, we're going to talk about the Shema in a second, applies morning and evening. Okay, so I have that unit of the Shema because it's now evening, it's the Ma'ariv service. And I'm going to have a Shema unit, by the way, which is very similar in the morning service. Make sense?
Yes, I have a question though. Why does it start with the evening and not in the morning?
Because the day starts when the day starts in Judaism. And the night. We start from the night. Okay. Now, what do we have in each unit? So we have the Shema. We have two brachot before, and actually before that we have the Baruch Hu. So we have a Baruch Hu, we have two brachot, we have the Shema, which consists of 3 sections, and then we have, well, in the morning 1 bracha, in the evening it started as 1 bracha and became 2 brachot later on, and then we have like little additions. I call it the Shema sandwich. We have the Shema, and then we have stuff before and after. Okay? Let's delve into that for a second. What do we have there? What do we have there? And all that kind of stuff. Okay. So the Baruch Hu itself, the Baruch Hu itself is what? Is a basically call to action. We say, Baruch Hu et Hashem Amvorach, the bless Hashem, the Blessed One. Congregation repeats, blessed is Hashem, the Blessed One, for all eternity. What is this? I call it call to action. It's basically what? If somebody today in 2024 would have written that, you know what would it say? Okay, everybody, get rid of your cell phones and pay attention, because we're going to do that together. It's called, like, join me in the davening. It's basically, hey, certain things like the Baruch Hu requires, it's what we call davar shebikdusha, requires a minyan. Okay, now, one of the definitions of a minyan is what? Okay, 10 people, that's good. That's a good start, but that's not enough. Forget about that for a second. 10, yes, next. But it's not enough. It's 10 people for the purpose of davening. Yes, obviously. But I'm saying, if I'm going to have people there, and everybody is like in a different place, they're not focused, they're like in their phone, whatever, not listening, not paying attention to what is going on. So I know that in our reality, we kind of like, okay, fine, it's 10. It's not enough. When we lived in Yerushalayim, I davened in a interesting minyan, and one of the Gavaim there, before we started, he would go like he stopped the Chazan before Baruch Hu and said, everybody is with us, like because it's not enough to be 10. It's like 10 for the purpose of tefillah. Okay, and that is that call. That's the call for action. That's what he says. Baruch Hu Hashem v'allah. Blessed God. That's like, join me in that act of tefillah. You're with me. And we respond, Baruch Hashem v'allah l'olam va'ed. Yes, we're with you. Okay? Good. So we have a call to action. We make sure everybody is focused, and we go into this Shema unit. Now, as I said, the Shema has two blessings preceding. One is what we call Hama'ariv Aravim. And, let's go just one tiny thing. The Shema, the Shema is obviously from the Tanakh, but the Baruch Hu is very, very ancient, you understand. We find it already in the Mishnah. It's something that we find already in the Mishnah, which is the second century. Okay? And that structure, we find it already in the Mishnah. The Baruch Hu and the structure and those brachot. The theme of the brachot, what is all about, it's the Gemara that tells us, also Masechet Brachot, tells us, so it's a couple of hundred years later. And the Gemara also says that those brachot were composed by Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, members of the Great Assembly. That means the end of the Second Temple era. So this is like all very, very ancient stuff. Now, when we go to the first bracha, wait, before going into the first bracha, there's something that we need to understand. This practice of having tefillot surrounding a biblical text, it's something that we do all the time. I'll give you an example. Psukei de Zimra. We have tefillah before, and then we go into the Shema unit, which is tefillah after. So Psukei de Zimra, which are biblical, right, are surrounded by tefillot. Hallel. Hallel is smack right after the Amidah. It's biblical. All the verses are from Tehillim. Okay, so we have this practice of taking parts from the Bible and put text, liturgy before and after. Same goes for the Shema. So the Shema itself, right, we have It's 3 sections. It's from the Torah. But we're going to have the brachot before and after. Okay? Yes, Nikki, you with me? Okay, good. So, what is the theme of the first bracha? If you look at that in the English, quickly. Time, right? King of the universe, who by his word brings on evenings, with wisdom opens gates, with understanding alters periods, changes the seasons, and orders the stars in their heavenly constellation as he wills, etc. I would call it in one word, nature. It's God of nature, God of the universe, God of creation. Okay?
Why did they put this, why did they mention separately?
I'm sorry?
If you can say God of creation.
Yeah.
why did they separate?
What do I separate? It's a description. I'm saying like the theme. The theme. Yeah? Okay. So one of the things that we have throughout our tefillot, like in many, many places, is a theme. We go from universalism to particularism. Okay? And we're going to see it here. There's this, we move from, okay, so we have God, who is the God of the universe, God of creation, luminaries, stars, nature, call it all, okay? Fine. What is the next one? The next bracha. God loves us. So we move in that direction. Now it started with creation, the whole world. Now it moves, Beit Yisrael amcha ahavta. God loves the Jewish people. And God gave us Torah, mitzvot, chukim, mishpatim. You taught us the Torah, and therefore, we rejoice in your Torah, etc., and the mitzvot. Okay? You see the movement. It's not only acceptance, but you see thematically, you see the movement. We from universal to particular. God of the universe, Jewish people, and what's going to be the Shema? The Shema, which comes immediately after that, is the next stop in that transition. It's me. It's my relationship with God. So God in the beginning is the God of the universe, creation, and then it's Am Yisrael in general, our relationship with God, Torah, mitzvot, okay, beautiful. And then it's my personal relationship with God. Because what is the Shema? Okay. It's the greatest declaration of faith in God. We believe in one God. It's the closest that what Christianity has creed. That's the closest that we have. A declaration of faith. And you understand the process. If God created heaven and earth, and then God gave some sort of let's call it manual for life, which is Torah mitzvot, to Am Yisrael, then the only conclusion, the only rational conclusion is, I believe in God. So this is the transition. Yes?
Why does it start with the word Shema? Somebody has to say the word Shema cannot stand by itself, because here you Israel, God is the one. So who?
But that's the Torah. That's the pasuk from the Torah. Yeah.
Who brought it up? Because the word Shema, it's listen. So what does it really mean? Who said to us listen? Who told us to listen?
Well, we will look, that pasuk was given to us by Moshe from what we call Mipri Gvura, from God. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Now, which brings us to the Shema itself, which we should probably do next week. But just a closing thought on that. The same structure we're going to see in the Shema sandwich. So we have the Shema. I'm just going to tell you quickly. After the Shema, we're going to have a blessing, a long blessing called redemption, Geula. Okay? In the Ma'ariv, it's going to be interrupted with another one. We're going to deal with that next week. Don't worry. So, but we have this movement. We move from God of creation to the relationship of Am Yisrael to the personal relationship. We're going to see a similar process, not exactly, but the same, but also a process in the Shema itself, in the 3 sections. We're going to deal with that next week. And then after the Shema, we have another bracha called Geula, redemption. In the morning service, where we have the Shema unit, it's the same structure. We're going to have, again, God of the universe, nature, the whole thing. That's Yotzer Or Uboreh Choshech, Oseh Shalom Uboreh Et Hakol. Again, God, nature, luminaries, the whole thing. Into Ahava Rabbah, which is very similar to Ahavat Olam. It's the love, it's a relationship with Am Yisrael, leading into the Shema. My personal declaration, my relationship with God, into Geula, redemption. Because why? Because redemption, whether it's national or personal, happens what? After the Shema. After I accept the yoke of heaven, after I accept that, I declare and I understand my relationship with God, that leads me thematically into redemption. That's already before. I believe because I understand that there is a God, okay, the God of the universe. Oh, that God also told me what to do and how to behave. Here's Torah mitzvot. Oh, I believe in God. And because I believe in God, I can continue to redemption. Whether it's national, whether it's personal, doesn't matter at this point. The idea of redemption is the outcome of that Shema, which is, by the way, according to philosopher Rosenzweig, Rosenzweig, our themes, the themes of Tefillah, we have creation, which we just saw, right? That's creation. Redemption. And in between, we have revelation. What's a revelation? Well, that's usually it's Sinai, but it's also what? It's the Shema.
But it's connected in the one word, the creation.
No.
The start one. When God created, everything was there.
Correct, but we're talking about the process that I go through. Okay, recognizing that. So if I go through a revelation, if I experience that revelation, which is the Shema, that's going to get me into redemption. Okay, these are the themes. These are 3 words. Like it's taking like the whole concept, the whole 13 Ikarim of the Rambam. It's taking like the whole understanding of Judaism and crunching it to 3 words. It's creation, revelation, redemption. And redemption happens when creation and revelation meet. Okay, it's deep, but it's not me. But it does resonate with me. Okay, so next week, just as that, next week we're gonna start dissecting the Shema and moving further. Yes.
Next week, when it starts with the word Shema Israel,